It just the thing was just at the end now, and all of a sudden he came crashing through these double doors, took one right off the hinges, and danced around with.
Oh shit! Did I just move everything?
So would you like? So do we start? Like I'll just say we're native immigrant and we're doing and then you guys.
Well, it's recording.
So tell me when is recording now?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
recording.
So I would like to welcome everybody to our first episode of our film conversations of Native Immigrant. Native Immigrant is a collective non-for-profit organization that aims to build bridges between immigrants and First Nations. Although we have been challenged now, that is the difference between Native immigrants and settlers. But we can have that conversation later. And I would like to introduce...
Also that go ahead, introduce
No,
me.
sorry. So I'm just going to say that this is our first youth engagement project, something Philip Deering wanted to do. And I want to introduce you to Isabela Blutito Echeverria and Shale Ripley. And you guys can introduce yourselves, but this is the episode called Rotten Apples. So here we go.
Yeah. And I'm one of the rotten apples, so...
Yeah, do you want to explain the whole idea behind rotten apples?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're the kind of people that tend to block bridges.
But where does the rotten apple came from? Because you remember you told me about the Premier of Ontario.
Yeah, yes. So in Ontario, in Caledonia, which is near the Six Nations community, okay, the people are building housing projects on indigenous territory.
You say six? You said Six Nations?
Yeah, it's the name of the community, Six Nations.
Okay, where is that?
Yeah, it's near Brantford, Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah. Brantford is on one side of Six Nations, on the other side is Caledonia.
Okay.
And Caledonia is the place where they say people... And so some young people block the construction of these housing projects. And then the police show up to arrest the young people, who are only a small handful of young people. But when the police show up, then the entire community seems to show up to support them, and the police run away. And according to the Premier of Ontario, this handful of young people is just a small group of rotten apples.
Yes.
Rotten apples are also rebels.
Exactly. So the rotten apple is a great name to be.
And they are a group which has so much support that the police run away.
Wow. That's a good thing. We should have more rotten apples here in Montreal too.
And interesting. But of course, the police do not take the wisest course of action. When they go to arrest these rotten apples, they block all the roads with their cars so that nobody can come to support them, I guess.
Right.
But what the Indians do in Six Nations is they drive right up to the barricade and then they get out of their cars and run through the field. Which the police did not plan for, to have these big Indians come running at them like this through the fields. And so they run away.
Wow.
That's really good.
Yeah.
And so, just as someone who doesn't know much about this side of politics, Indigenous politics, the whole conflict, I personally don't know much about that, and I don't think I'm the only one my age. I feel like that's not really the forefront of the conversation with people our age right now. So how would you where would you begin? Where would you start from where the conflict began?
Christopher Columbus?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
In this situation, what you have is in the American Revolutionary War, some Mohawks supported the British. And so when the British got thrown out of where they were before by the Americans, so did those Mohawks. So those Mohawks didn't have a home anymore. And the British decided to compensate the Mohawks.
Technical difficulty.
Sorry.
He didn't
It's
break
okay.
the door off this time, but so they compensated the Mohawk by a thing that's called the Haldeman deed. Okay.
Okay.
And the Haldeman deed is supposedly a grant. You know,
A grant.
A grant.
if you can imagine this, the British are granting Native people some land.
Okay.
There's-
That
Wait,
they
in
own.
North America?
Like
yeah,
here.
and there's something like a little bit problematic with that statement, but you know that it's the Haldeman grant. I mean, so they granted the Mohawks some land that belonged to somebody else, Mississauga Indians or something. And the grant was 12 miles either side of the Grand River. Okay, so the Grand River goes into Lake Erie and starts somewhere around Kitchener or even further north than that. So this is a huge piece of land. And much of which has been sold off, stolen, whatever, and now Six Nations is a little space like this. Yeah. And Caledonia is right next to it. And it's like when people start building housing developments in Caledonia, it's like, okay, you got too close now. You've stolen all the rest of the land,
Mm.
but we still have this, and you're too close.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, right against it, and you're too close. So where it really starts with, for this particular situation, is that there's a group of young people where there is no way you're going to convince them that that land doesn't belong to them, well, to the Mohawk people.
And doesn't that come down to like a whole cultural discrepancy? Just because it was like, I mean, I was taking a Western Civ class today, and ironically, like we were like looking at the difference between European culture and Indigenous culture, and they were saying how like the Indigenous people have like a communal understanding of the land. So it's like, you know, you use what you need and then you give what you can. Whereas with Europeans, they kind of saw being able to use this land as, oh, we bought it, so it's ours now. And so there's that fundamental disagreement just because the two cultures are so different, that one believes it was a business transaction and one believes it was, you know, borrowing that went a little bit too far for too long.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Sharing, okay. You said borrowing, sharing, okay. So we can share this land together, okay. But it's hard to share if you think you own it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do we share when you figure it's yours?
Mm-hmm.
And it's that's so yeah. There's a cultural difference in that. Well, why can't we work together? No, I own it. We cannot work together. We have to follow the law. Well, who's writing the law? Well, one side is writing the law, and the other side has to follow it. There's something not sharing about that.
Can I ask you something, Philip? Because if we really want to go to the beginning of the conversations, shouldn't we all know what wampums are? Because there's a lot of people who are living today who take part in political discussions without really even knowing what they're talking about, because it's not something people are saying, well, you know, we conquered, they lost, and get used to it, and that's the way it goes. But there was no conquering, there was no losing, there was an agreement that was called wampums, and people don't know the agreements that we should be living by. So I always say that we need to go back to wampums to understand where we're living. And if you're a young lady living today in Canada, you need to know what agreements your ancestors have made so you can live here properly and not continue to break the agreements.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think
good
it's
point.
super important to inform and share about agreements.
Mhm.
And if you have to, like today we were asking you, Isabella asked me that she had checked online wampum.
Yeah, like I googled wampum just to like, you know, see what Google had to say. Because side note, like Philip, you were talking about like you sent an email that was like the perils of evidence-based learning, and you know
Yeah,
these days
yeah.
like evidence and research equals typing shit in Google.
Yeah.
So I googled like what are wampums, and then it like comes up and it's like, oh, it's a indigenous form of currency, and that's not what you told me.
No.
That's not what you told me. So what am I supposed to believe? And how would you tell me?
Yeah, so let's see how we can respond to this. Because wampums is a word used for several things. So technically, wampum beads are beads. So when I hear somebody say wampums, I'm thinking beads.
Okay.
Um,
So does the
Wha-
word wampum mean beads, or does it have multiple?
Well, it's not a Mohawk word, first of all, so we'd have to go and ask maybe the Narragansett people or somebody living in that neighborhood. Because wampum beads are made from quahog shells, okay, which are a kind of clam shell,
Oh, okay.
which are found all along the Atlantic seaboard. So we're not that close to the Atlantic seaboard right here, so the wampum beads were all imported from there, and they had a lot of value, which goes to the question of currency. I don't think they were ever native currency.
Okay.
They were colonist currency because the colonists who arrived from Europe didn't have enough coinage around to have coin currency. And probably in those days people weren't really going to trust paper currency,
Like just-
okay, I'll give you a piece of paper, and they're like, yeah, are you serious? You want to buy this really valuable thing from me? Just that piece of paper, So
Just
until
leave it.
until
Yeah.
paper money becomes universally trusted, we're stuck with something that has more concrete value, let's say, like coins.
Yeah.
Only there's not enough metal around to make all these coins, like valuable metals. Could have made out of some cheap metal, but then you're back to the same problem as paper. Like, really, you're going to give
Like
me?
it means nothing.
It means nothing. So, but wampums was pretty much universally valued in the northeast woodlands. Okay, and if you look on the map, you see that the northeast woodlands is a large place, and it includes the Atlantic seaboard, but it goes up to the Great Lakes, and it goes pretty far north as well. And and we go to the south, except it's the northeast woodlands, so we somehow excluded the people in the south. I don't know why. And that may be for cultural reasons. Okay, so you're talking about culture. Okay, so say for example, if you're familiar with Chinese culture, then you would know that the people in Vietnam are not Chinese, but they have a Chinese culture. So sometimes culture is not necessarily synonymous with the boundary lines that we know.
Okay.
And I've spoken to Vietnamese people. I said, this is what my history professor told me, that you guys have Chinese culture. And they looked at me and said, yeah. The Chinese have historically been their enemies. Like, they've been at war with them for 1,000 years, war with each other for pretty much 1,000 years. And yet they share the same culture somehow. They're two different peoples. So in the northeast woodlands, we have a lot of people sharing similar culture. And so that's why the south gets left out, I guess, because theirs is a little bit kind of a different culture. And just like any place else, in Montreal, the culture of the East End is not the same as the culture of the West End, let's say, for example. So within the northeast woodlands, of course, there are variances, but there are similarities. Like the East End and the West End are all Montrealers, so they share something. And I'm sure you can find cultural things. So culture is a complicated question.
Yeah. I mean, sociologists to this day still don't have, they still don't agree on a definition of culture, So, it's hard to even know that.
But throughout the northeast woodlands, wampum beads were valued by Native American people, and the European populations were actually quite small. So if the Native Americans all valued something, it was something that the colonists could use as money because it had universal value. So even though the people from Europe might say, well, what do I do with these stupid wampums? It's like no idea or whatever. But they knew that they could use it
To trade.
to trade and as money, as currency. So yeah, it was used as currency.
But that wasn't the intent behind it when it was given. But
Well, it wasn't.
That's how it was
yeah,
used.
yeah. It wasn't really us using it as currency. It was something we valued. Just like
Right.
And they decided to use it as the currency to
They-
deal with you.
Yeah,
Okay.
and with one another in the
Yeah,
end, because
okay.
I want you make shoes. I want to buy shoes from you. I still got to give you something of value. I make apples. I mean, I grow apples, but you got enough apples, and you don't want any more of these rotten apples. So it's like, you say that's no good. Give me something that I can use. And what can you use is something that's currency, because you really have no use for wampums,
Yeah.
except you can take them and go get something that you do value, that you wanted.
Yeah.
And they'll accept that as payment.
And under capitalism, what is valuable just automatically becomes currency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but what were the natives valuing wampum for?
Yeah, that's the big question.
And there's many uses. I mean, But generally making strings of wampum, so they put them on string. I'm not sure what they use for string because there was no store to buy string, but them hemp or something that they would make some kind of thread on, and they can make strings of them. So what are you doing with the strings of wampum? Well, sometimes they were used for ceremonial purposes, such as the welcome at the wood's edge, for example, where you can invite new people to the territory. You have certain strings, but those are also can be used for condolence ceremonies when somebody dies. So there's a whole complex set of rituals, say the condolence complex, which included both things you use to address grief when someone dies, but also things you can use to greet new people to your land, or even older people. I mean, they don't have to be entirely new.
Mm-hmm.
They were used to greet people who traveled a long way. And what's the relation between greeting somebody and grief? Because the idea is that even in traveling, you experience grief. So
Because you're leaving
really-
something behind.
Yeah, there's all kinds. You were leaving from some place. You had to go through the thorny bushes, and they hurt.
And you're thirsty.
Yeah, you're thirsty. You're hungry. You stumbled on this and that, and all kinds of terrible things happened. You had to go to the customs people, customs and immigration, and that's a whole grief in its own. So there's all kinds of grief.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you greet the person at the wood's edge, as we call it, because back in the day, we were living in the northeast woodlands, but we didn't live in trees. We lived in the clearings.
Yeah.
So there was always a wood's edge. It's kind of a boundary between the village
The different clearings.
and the woods that surrounded the village. Because we were a people that grew corn, beans, squash, and other cultigens. So again, they don't grow that well in the forest. You have to make a clearing. So, and we lived in the clearing. And the woods edge is where we would greet newcomers to our village. Yeah. So, but in addition to that, and I think in the way that Carolina's using the word wampums, is they also can be used to make belts. So not just strings of wampum, each string representing something, but a whole belt that represents perhaps an agreement that we'll make with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a trade agreement or whatever kind of agreement. And when newcomers arrive from Europe, then we may make agreements with them as well.
Is that where the two-row agreement comes in?
Yeah, so that's where we were supposed to be doing something with Philip about the two-row agreement. But I thought that before we would talk about the two-row agreement, we needed to really, because I wanted to talk about that with Isabella, and I was saying yeah, but how far off do we start the conversation? Like, what is a wampum? So so the wampum, okay, so there's the shell, and there's the string, and then the strings become the belts, and the belts are really treaty. So settlers were writing these big documents, and I always said to Philip, to me, the wampum belts were the most sophisticated abstract art I've ever seen, because it's like the white people had to write and write and write and write and kill trees to continue writing all the stuff they did, and they still wouldn't make it clear. And the indigenous people were just creating an image created with little dots that today could be like pixels in a computer.
Right.
And entire concepts and agreements and rules and whatever were said in the most minimalistic way you can imagine. So to me, as an artist, that is the most sophisticated artistic brain I've ever seen.
It's like the similar way to how in some Chinese characters it's just a bunch of different symbols that kind of come together to make some kind of like the water course-way symbol, for example.
Yeah,
So
but
is it
imagine that's even more.
Yeah.
It's like, so
More
I always
intricate.
so that's what I feel like, I remember telling you that to me wampums were like abstract art legal documents, in the language of abstract art, because they're really, but I still think that that's my opinion, but I mean it's what's important to me is that we as people living in this land, we need to know the agreements our ancestors made, and those like me who came here as an immigrant later on when those agreements were made, I don't want to be part of the people who breaks them and continues to oppress. So if I'm not informed, so I don't want to use the word educated because another bad beings there, I would like to know what the wampums are about. So if you would say, which wampum should we start with, or what?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Like, if we're talking about wampums, abstract art, that kind of like implies that there's like interpretation. Like, is there room for interpretation in the agreements, and like how does one like interpret the
Wow.
agreement of the wampum?
That's a very good question. That's what, and again, that's like my idea of abstract art. But I think that Philip, of course, is not an abstract art thing. And what about that, Philip? Because you would bring in that idea of oral tradition, how things are, the difference between oral tradition and written tradition. Also, there's something there. We've talked a lot, but I would like to let you answer that, Philip.
Yeah. There's quite a few things to respond to in what's been said the last minute or two. So I'll just continue on from where I left off. So the wampum belts, if you can think of them like documents, and if you think in English that there are written documents, so they're all kind of documents, you know. So treaties and agreements are one kind of documents, and so wampum belts could be used for that. And seems to be one of the favorites from an English or European point of view, because that's usually the ones that you'll find in museums. Oh, okay, look at these treaty agreements, these treaty agreements, these treaty agreements. So those are found in a museum. But wampum belts can also be used to tell a story, okay, particularly a history. So some people will, and I gave Carolina an article which has a story in a wampum belt. You know, so here's the story, like a history of the people. This was the story about the first white man who came to our territory. You know, like it includes that. You know, and then what happened, and what happened, and what happened, and what happened.
Do we want to go through that story, or is that
Well,
hefty?
I'll let Carolina tell that story when she's got it better understood. That's, by the way, was an Ojibwe story. Okay, it's an Ojibwe belt, so it wasn't Mohawk or Iroquois. And so they're using that. So here's all this story, and it's a great story. It has many components in it, and we just had a discussion upstairs which had various aspects of culture and politics and different themes in it, and it's like, okay, yeah, and it includes ideas of the other and the other and the other, okay? Well, the story I'm hearing is all like from this particular point of view, which includes the idea of the other and the other and the other, and yet from the oral tradition, like what Carolina's talking about as well, actually we're all related.
Right.
We're all the same people, okay? We grew up in different territories, let's say. Today we can all grow up in a territory, and still, same territory, and still be in different environments. So maybe we grow up with different cultures, and they say, oh, okay, I have this culture and somebody else is the other. Well, that's the cultural way of looking at it. A more human way of looking at it is we're all the same people. We're all human beings. We're all related. And when new people, you know, like let's just say, for example, one Mohawk way of saying hello is sego. And sego just translates as almost like encore, okay? Again, or
Okay.
yet, or still, you know. I don't know what Mohawk, what English word we would use to convey all those meanings, but the French word encore, you know, carries all those meanings.
Bonjour.
And
Hi, bonjour. We should all say c'est quoi. Yeah.
and,
Say that
and
instead of the story.
in Sego, you could say that to somebody. Each one person has interpreted as it's a short way of saying, I am happy to see you again. Okay.
Huh.
Okay, I'm happy to see you again, even though I never met you in my life. Okay? I know, like, where did you even come from? I mean, it's like, but I recognize that we are actually all connected. And so I'm happy to see you again, because we're already connected, see? So when I hear all this discussion about the other, it's like, yeah, but we're all the same people, you know, it's like, why am I looking at, oh, you grew up in a different culture, so you're different, you know, and it's like, you're the other. Or you're almost like saying, you know, you're the enemy, you know, it's like, or the people like that I don't understand, and you're strange, but funny, you're a human being, same as me, so what's so hard to understand, you know? And we share a lot of universal things. So that's an attitude that we have. So why do we need an agreement? Why do we need a wampum agreement? Why do we need this treaty agreement?
Yeah.
Well, The folks who arrived from Europe, okay, had this idea that, well, everything needs to be arranged in a hierarchy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
that's
I'll be your father, I'll take care of you. So that's what they're saying to us, and I was like, don't really seem to understand how human beings work. People are supposed to take care of you. It's not like, oh, you're going to take care of me, but they're coming from this class system,
Right.
kings and lords, and they all got to take care of these peasants who don't know how to take care of themselves. But you could never tell that to the peasants, because I think the peasants would say, what are you talking about? We plant, we do this. You're the one that doesn't know how to do anything. Do you plant?
Yeah.
So what do you eat? You
it's
eat
like throw
stuff
them
I
on a
grow.
farm and see
you
what
know?
they're gonna do. Yeah.
So, so we're not nearly really in agreement, but then these people are coming and saying, oh, well, this is the way it's going to work, and, I'm going to take care of you, and it's like, oh, really? And so then they created this thing called the Wampum Agreement. And say, okay, listen. You like the ideas you have, okay, you can keep them, they're not going to work, okay? Hierarchy is just not workable. In the long run. I mean, surprisingly, it's actually still around, so I guess it works better than what we thought it would work.
I
But
mean, is it really working right now, though?
yeah, and it's like we're kind of getting to the point where we say, wait a minute, hierarchy is like, that doesn't really work, but it's taken the visitor a longer time to get there. We were already there, okay? We were already so we said, okay, well, let's make the tour of Wampum. You keep your hierarchy in your boat. Like Tour of Wampum, some of the imagery behind that, or the metaphor behind it, is two vessels traveling side by side down the river of life. Okay.
And the visual, Philip, is a white row, purple row,
Yeah.
white row, purple row,
Yeah.
white row. So it's
Yeah.
5 rows,
Yeah.
Wampum down.
That's the visual of the
Yeah,
wampum.
the visual of the
So
wampum.
I'm speaking about the visual of the oral
Yeah.
tradition. Two vessels traveling side by side down the river of life. Okay. One is a canoe, one is a sailing ship. We're going to keep our ways in our canoe. And you can keep your ways in we're not going to say, oh, you're the other and you got to change and be like us. No. Just the way you want to be, that's the way you're going to be. Keep it in your sailing ship, and then the two will travel side by side. So in terms of settler regime, this is a settler's idea, I guess, of hierarchy. The farmer, I would argue, doesn't have that same way of thinking necessarily. The farmer grows plants, and he's happy, he's got neighbors, and they help one another, and here's I'm going to boss you and tell you how to grow, food on your farm, and how you should farm, and everything like that. The settler regime tries to tell its own people, oh, these people all need to plant whatever because that's what we need up here in the hierarchy. Anyway, so there you go. And we'll travel the river of life together, and we'll help one another, and there'll be peace and friendship between us. And it's a bit of a lie, actually. In my opinion, the true wampum is a bit of a lie, or it's just, but let's find a nicer word than that one. It's
Delusion.
It's a bit of a temporary arrangement, okay? Well, those folks in your sailing ship are eventually going to sink because it's just not going to work. Okay?
Right.
And in the meantime, let's get along, and and away we go. And so that's Tour of Wampum. So, and perhaps at long last, the folks who are in this boat will more and more embrace a more egalitarian point of view rather than the hierarchical. The question of wampum and hierarchy, okay, going back. Eventually we'll come forward, but for now we can go back. Our oldest stories, which actually predates the wampum, would be the story of Okiwe. Okay, so in the oral tradition, and the Okiwe is actually one of the most supported events that we have, meaning not only do traditional people come and participate in the ceremony of Okiwe, which is held once a year in the spring, the day before the last snowfall. And that even people who are not traditionalists, who may have embraced whatever settler religions have arrived in our territory, and a lot of people have embraced that, they also come and participate in Okiwe, whereas they might not participate in any of the other traditional ceremonies. So the story of Okiwe goes back to a time before we were planting corn or planting anything else. Well, I guess we were hunters and gatherers and fishermen and whatnot, and these large animals used to come and destroy our villages. Okay.
Like actual animals, or is this like a metaphor?
It's have trouble figuring out what they are. I mean, it's an old story, and those animals aren't around anymore. So, like, for a while when we first heard about dinosaurs, or so maybe it was the dinosaurs. But now we know, of course, dinosaurs are really ancient.
It's like a mammoth or something.
Yeah,
so,
I think somebody did say they were like a mammoth, kind of an elephant. Yeah.
So most likely it was the woolly mammoth, okay, which seems to be documented by their coexistence was they were here, and human beings may have been responsible for them not being here nowadays. Okay. And so it's always the woolly mammoth is said, but actually there was an even larger mammoth which was called the Columbian mammoth. And I thought maybe because it came from Colombia, but no, it was named after Christopher Columbus.
Does it have a holiday named after it too?
Yeah, I told you, everything started with Christopher Columbus. So here were these Columbian mammoths wrecking the villages. And the whole story is put in terms of hierarchy, okay? Because it's meant that these animals were making all the decisions of, like they decide they're going to be in charge and they're wrecking the villages. So how do we address them? And they were big. And they killed people. And the story goes that a young boy and a young girl had a dream in which they communicated with the people who had been killed by these animals. And he explained that if the people who had died and the people who were still living would work together, they could defeat the animals. But the thing is, how does those people who have gone someplace else, presumably, or if that was whatever the belief system one might have, they're not here anymore. How could we and they work together? And there's a whole song with over 100 verses, and it's actually a dance with 100 verses, which is done, and particularly when the women sing, they have high-pitched voices, which the people who have gone on before can hear, and follow that sound to join together with the people who are alive. Okay? And it's cool because that song's still done today with over 100 verses, and it has some elements of history. So it's not just Wampum that records history, but this is very interesting because you say, once upon a time, before you had Wampum or you could write stuff, how did you maintain stories? And one of the ways is in song. Because the song will tend to stay the same. Okay?
There's repetition as well. And
yeah, there's a lot of repetition and change. I mean, of course you can change. But and even in this song, for example, where did this story take place? Okay? But in this song, there are also pecans. And pecans grow, like, say, in Georgia. Not too far from Colombia, by the way. But not that close either, but still. But pecans. So it suggests this took place in a part of our history when we were in Georgia, around Georgia area. Okay? Which contradicts what anthropologists would suggest, because anthropologists would suggest that we migrated from the, let's say, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, or someplace area, okay, or maybe even a little bit further west. But wherever it is, that we came up like the Mississippi River. And we followed the Mississippi River to arrive here, which the Mississippi River does come this way. A lot of people wouldn't realize that because it hooks to the Great Lakes, and by the Great Lakes you can get here. So. And so what are we doing in Georgia if we're supposed to be on the Mississippi, according to anthropologists? But a good friend of Carolina's that we run named Roy Wright, okay, who was a linguist, which is also an anthropologist, but linguists are somewhat different from other anthropologists. For one thing, they actually talk to people. Because it's hard to be a linguist of such and such a language, you're gonna be a linguist of the Mohawk language, you better talk to Mohawk people. Otherwise, we're not going far. So that's whereas other kinds of anthropologists could sit in a office someplace and figure out all kinds of wonderful things and tell you all about Mohawks without ever meeting one.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, I'm just gonna like see what other people who haven't met Mohawks have to say,
Yeah.
and then that's their tradition.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I won't push it too far because actually anthropologists do tend to talk to indigenous people. There's also the story of every native person has a pet anthropologist that used to live with their house or something. So they do talk to us. But the linguist has actually connected Mohawk language with certain languages that are in the Caribbean and just off the coast of Venezuela. Okay. So he's instead of coming out the Mississippi, he was coming through Venezuela, okay, crossing the Caribbean and arriving on the southeast coast, Atlantic coast, like where Georgia is, and coming inland, and so this one lone linguist would put that migration against all these other anthropologists. And you might think, well, why listen to the one guy when everybody else is on the other side? And the answer is he presented it at a conference. Excuse me. He presented his ideas at a conference, and all the archaeologists were going bananas because he was proving what they had already, or he was giving the idea of what they were already seeing. They were already, by digging up stuff, seeing that there was a migration that came this way, but who the heck migrated this way? You didn't think it was us because the anthropologists saying we came this way.
Okay.
So
They said.
So once Roy put this idea, said, yeah, the archaeologists had already seen this migration through all their diggings and the stuff that they dig up. So, according to Roy Wright and the archaeologists, it matches our story of the Okiwa, which places this at one point in time in Georgia. So there we were. People worked together, and not just us and the people who went on before, but all of the wolves and everything else. Everybody worked together, and that's what happened to the woolly mammoths, according to this story. And I don't know that anyone has a better story because they just know there used to be woolly mammoths here, and they're not here anymore. It must have been the human beings that did it. And yeah. According to our story, yeah, it was us, but we worked together with everyone else. So it's a very collaborative approach. So we have this deep-rooted collaborative culture.
Okay.
Very much so.
And now we arrive at the creation story, which continues that, okay? Because the creation story, which ironically comes later than the other story.
It's true.
Because it's the creation story because members of the clergy, when they arrive in our territories, even before the Jesuits, everybody knows about the Jesuits, but there were others that came before them.
Were they Christian or?
Yes.
Always Christians.
Yeah,
The Christians are.
yeah. They were. I can't remember what sect they were, but
What, the ones that came here?
the one that came before the Jesuits was.
Protestant?
The
No, they didn't.
Protestant?
They didn't.
No, it was
No.
Catholic.
Evangelize.
Catholic. It was from France, okay,
Oh, the Catholics for sure.
and they were Catholic, of course.
Yeah, Catholics
and,
came from France, yeah.
And
The Jesuits would have been
and they
Spanish,
tended
no?
to call themselves more brothers than fathers. Okay,
Yeah.
so they were more of a brotherly order, but they record like the creation story. Basically, according to one anthropologist, it goes like this. Okay, there's the Christian brother. So, tell us your creation story. And so the native person, Hurons in this case, are telling the story about, well, in the land before this land. Okay. And we want your creation story. Well, in the land before this land, okay. No, I want your creation story. All right, in the sky world. Oh, okay. We'll accept a story that starts in the sky world.
yeah.
You're right.
So that's how our creation story ends up in the sky world.
Because it wasn't. It wasn't all.
It was on the other land, like the place before before here.
Yeah,
But the Christians want to go back to heaven.
Heaven,
Everything starts in heaven.
Yeah. Or and
It's just another hierarchy.
Yeah,
that comes from
higher,
above.
exactly.
Yeah.
it's kind of like when you're talking about culture. Okay, here's where the culture of the I don't know. Is it the Christian? Is it the religion, or is it just everybody from Europe? Okay.
No, but the religion of Catholicism starts by the Roman Empire,
Yeah.
who wanted to have a hierarchical system of belief. So they wanted to be
because
on top.
when I read what the anthropologist is saying all the time is, all the people of the world want to know where they started from. So they have to have like all the people of the world in other words have a creation story. And it's like, well, why should we have a creation story?
Yeah, why?
Yeah, again, in the Bible, there's a creation story,
Because of
and
the Bible,
people believe that,
Yeah.
and that's fine, and it's good, and that's what they have. But why does it mean I have to have a creation story? Like, maybe,
Because otherwise you don't make sense to me.
yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
That's what
true.
it is about.
Obsession of like linear
It's like you only
time.
exist in
Yeah,
reference to me. So you need to tell me a story that makes sense to me. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
And don't they also believe?
Because I'm in charge.
Isn't also one of the commandments that like thou shalt only worship the one true
Yeah,
God? And
of
meanwhile,
course.
it's like
Everybody
isn't
else
there
is-
like a pretty wide pantheon? Or is there a pantheon like?
there's
Tradition.
well, there's many forms. Okay, some people have the one God. Okay, some people have dual gods. So like the Christians with the God of good and the God of evil.
Okay.
So, it's not so much just one. It tends to be two with Christians. Okay, so
Yeah.
they're both mixed in there.
Okay.
Not to mention the idea of the God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy
And the
Ghost.
Holy Spirit. So it's
So
three beings.
so it's three. So it's like you're starting to get close to a pantheon. Okay, one too many.
I
Does
know.
Mother Nature count as like a god?
Well, I don't know.
It's it's like some might call that animism because now there's gods in the things we see around it. And what other choices are? Well, there's the idea of not having gods. Okay, so we don't believe in gods, or we and it's like, for me, the closest that fits is not any gods. Okay, it's like. But other people will say different, okay? So I'm going to say, oh, no, but there's the master of life. Okay, that you say the master of life kind of sounds like one God. And today people do say the creator, but that's a pretty much modern word, so it's like, sounds like saying God, okay? God and creator. Creator is an indigenous way of saying God. It's like, so there's one. But the idea, but a lot of times what we get accused of is, we worshipped all these different things in nature, like the sun, I don't know, everything, the moon, the earth, the earth's mother is our God. It's like, it's not like... But in my understanding, there's no way that we look at things as God. We look at these are other beings, okay?
Okay.
Yeah. So... there's a sun, which is a being. There's a moon, which is a being, or water, which is a being, or which some might not. Some would think, it's only animals that can be beings, or whatever, But what about the plants? What about all these different kind of beings? So it's all fine. Okay. So the creation story, however, starts with in the world before this world. Well, what was the world before this world? Okay. And the answer is very simple, because if you look at the story, it's at the time of the Neolithic agricultural revolution. So in the world before, we were hunter-gatherers. In the world after, we were people who grew stuff, which some people would call agricultural. It's in the word Neolithic agricultural revolution. And some purists would say it's not agriculture, because we didn't raise animals.
Do you need animals for it to be
Agriculture?
According to some anthropologists.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like, you're not...
Domestication of animals, yeah.
You're not... Only a true agriculturalist would
So
raise
even the
animals.
hierarchy within
Exactly.
the
Come over
You're
and
not
over
a true agriculture. You're just a plant
You're
grower.
poser.
A plant grower person, yeah.
But as we receive the story today, so a woman falls from the sky world, because nobody will going to buy this story of
Another.
without the hierarchy in it. So the hierarchy gets put into the story. But if you pay attention, go beyond the skin deep, what happens as she's falling? Well, the birds see her following, and they meet together in council, and because they can't figure out whether she's falling from the waters above or rising from the waters below. They finally decide she's falling from the waters above, and they get together and they catch her. So it's like, okay, well, were those gods now, or were those just other beings that we considered, in the story? Worked together with us. They helped us. Like, if it wasn't for them, she would have split. I was like, we're not going to be here to talk about it because they didn't catch her. you know. And so over and over in the story, there's all these collaborative things, and in the older story, it's eventually so she falls from the sky. She has a daughter. The daughter has twins. In the older story, the daughter has a son. Okay, and there becomes a disagreement between the grandmother and the son about how things should work. Okay.
Mm.
So they had some disagreements. Okay. In the more modern story, now there's twins, so like in the Bible there's twins, the book of Genesis there's
Right.
twins. So our story now has twins, which we call the left-handed twin and the right-handed twin. And they get to represent the original grandson and grandmother because they can't get along either. They can't agree on how things are to be.
Okay.
So the right-handed twin wants everything to be smooth and perfect, like the rivers will flow in both directions, so you want to travel, you can always be going downstream. It's so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the left-handed twin is like, no, the river should flow one way, and that's a struggle to go upstream, but that's what life is going to be like. Okay? So some things are easy, some things are hard, we struggle, we work, but this is how we live. And so they quarreled about that, and they actually at one point fought. That's how we have the Rocky Mountains, because that was the result of their
You serious?
gigantic fight. As one pushed another, just made a whole mountain.
I didn't know that. I never heard of that.
Yeah, it's all in that story. But the conclusion of the story is they found a way to work together, even though they could not think alike. So there's your cultures. Okay,
Right.
one became the other.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
They found it without hierarchy.
Yeah.
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 Because people find a way to work with one
Yeah,
another.
yeah, yeah.
Because nobody wants to be fighting.
Yeah. And the outcome of that today is we have two kinds of spirituality. Amongst Iroquois people, we have a daytime spirituality, which is the realm of the right-handed twin, and we have a nighttime spirituality, which is the realm of the left-handed twin. And in the daytime spirituality, we do things like decision making, we have meetings, making treaties and wampums and things like that.
Yeah.
And in the nighttime spirituality, boy, do we have fun! Okay, we dance and sing. And,
It's true.
it's a great, and some in our ceremonies are divided like that.
Yes, I remember that when Francis was doing the sun was coming down and he really had to, it's a real shift. It's quite amazing.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to let you guys with that one, but I really wanted to tell them that story because I remember I didn't realize how real it is that the division between the daytime and the nighttime, which is something that is so natural and makes sense to me, but it's not hierarchy either.
Yeah,
It's like
This is just what
Yes.
a day is.
It's the cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is just
It's a
a cycle.
so I let you my spot.
Circular motion instead of up and down.
So because Caroline is leaving, we're going to have to wrap up fairly quickly. But like but just to emphasize that idea of it's not a hierarchy. Okay. One of the symbols, well, in fact, the way we do it, when we acknowledge all these different forces of nature, the sun, we don't call the sun, it's an English word, okay? And the translation from the Mohawk is the daytime orb or the daytime sun, okay?
Okay.
And the moon is the nighttime sun.
So do the bodies define the day, or is the day already there and then these bodies are just there?
I didn't understand that question. but-
Honestly, it's been a long day. Just
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah. So, and we call the daytime sun our elder brother, which goes back to the older idea that it was between the sun, the sun and the grandmother, because we call the nighttime sun grandmother moon. You see, so it's like it's not the twins; it's the sun and the grandmother.
Right.
And how they work together, one is by they have separate realms. One comes out in the daytime, and the other one comes out actually all day long, in the daytime and the nighttime, but it's more prominent at night.
They leave each other space.
Yeah. So and they work together and blah blah blah, and so. But one of the ways they're able to work together is by having separate realms. That's kind of the metaphor of the story.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Boundaries.
Yeah.
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 And does that come back to the whole 2-row agreement?
Yeah.
You could argue.
Well, yes, I'm just really talking about the one half of the tour now. The idea of
Yeah.
how, things can work together in balance and blah, 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 all that nice stuff. But how it's built right into the different parts of the culture.
Totally.
So it's like, in a sense, they were always having this struggle between them about who should be the boss. But eventually they realized,
There's no need for a boss.
that,
Yeah.
it's like they have to be able to work together. Each realm is important. Each part of life is all part of this. They work together. And so that's why I say when the Europeans come and say, well, it has to be my way, it's like, yeah, okay, cute little idea, keep it in your boat. Let's just agree that you keep it in your boat and we'll go along with life together.
Yeah.
And there's another part to that which goes, and if some individuals want to leave the boat and come in the canoe, they're welcome, okay? So it's not, it's like, it's a recognition, as far as I'm concerned. We're all human beings, and it's like people want to leave that hierarchy idea behind and come over to ours. And a lot of people did. The history documents that. And in theory, if some people in the canoe want to go into the boat, they could do that too, but nobody would understand why would they ever want to do such a thing. And today there are some that, might have said, oh, okay, yeah, I give up. I like the hierarchy, Okay. They're free people. They can choose. I can choose to do such a foolish thing, but it's okay. We still have our prejudices and biases.
Everyone does.
But,
It's inevitable.
Yeah.
But the idea is that it's okay. It's like. So I would leave it at that.
I do.
That was beautiful.
Yeah.
I didn't know that the nighttime spirituality and daytime spirituality was something that's really cool.
I like how it connects the two boats.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
That's a wrap, boys.